What is up, guys, and welcome back to Dawn of Man, episode number 9. Guys, we're one close to the Big Ten, and today we're going to talk about the future of transportation. I'd be saying, oh, transportation, wow, you really ran out of topics here. But transportation is truly huge because it affects our lives in more ways than you really think. When we talk about transportation, we need to remember that transportation has a direct influence upon our whole sphere of influence within our lives. Alright, so to truly understand this concept, let's take it way back to the days when we used to live in tribes, when the only mode of transportation was to go by our own little 2 feet, and that truly shrunk our sphere of influence to a very small geographic area. And whatever you could walk to generally, was the village. Maybe you walked a little bit beyond, to fetch some water and to get whatever resource you needed to. But generally, anything far beyond that was considered to be them. So where you could walk, village was us, the tribe is us, and everyone else is them. They are not your friends. They're outside of the realm of your influence. So what happened next? We started using horses to get around. All of a sudden, we went from these small, tribal, tiny villages with perhaps 100 people or less, to all of a sudden they're living in cities, having small towns. In the Middle Ages, we had our first proper towns. We walled them in, and then we had fiefdoms where there was one town, and then there's multiple villages around it that were tied to the city, which is on the whole system of feudalism. And then we had more transportation. Like our transportation kept improving and improving, and all of a sudden we became a globalized world. Now if you live today, you can fly within a day's time to any country in the world, from one place to any other place. And what has happened because of that is that our sphere of influence is truly shifting. You see, back in the day, everybody was an enemy outside of your little village. Now, kids, after they graduate high school, they go off to college. Many of them, they go out of state. If you're living in the United States, sometimes, they go to a whole different country. We do foreign exchange programs. We're truly living global lives nowadays. Many families, they even have family members in different countries. Or perhaps, if you run a business, you've got employees in different countries, or you've got co-workers in different countries with global operations. So what we see is that with an improvements in travel, as travel becomes better, transportation becomes better, we see an increase in the exchange of ideas, the exchange of culture, a better understanding of how everybody else lives. And once we understand better how everybody else lives, there's a decrease in conflict. Because once you know your enemies, they're no longer your enemies. So this is the whole concept that we had before. You lived in your small little tribe, you didn't know what was beyond your little fence, beyond like the 1 hour walking distance you could go. Everybody else was an enemy. That was them. You had no clue. Maybe they weren't even humans. What do you know, right? But now we live in this global world where you can travel across the world within a day's span, and everything is so accessible. So the beauty of transportation truly is it makes us more open-minded. It brings us closer together. And I truly think that an improvement in transportation is one of the main contributors to having a more conflict-free world. So what I want to discuss in this video is what kind of changes in transportation are happening over the coming years, and how they will affect our paradigm of the world, how they will shift our culture, our society, our politics, and what we need to be aware of as we move into that world. So the first few trends that we see by 2020 are the following. The first thing we're going to see is self-driving cars. And this is already happening, right? So Tesla already has self-driving cars that can do multiple things by themselves. Uber's working on their own self-driving cars. There's many different brands that are already working on self-driving cars. In fact, Google was working on self-driving cars, I believe, as back as 2005, 2006, where they had a project run by Sebastian Thrun, who is also a big leader in AI. And the idea is that self-driving cars are now truly becoming a reality. And they could already now be a reality. But the reason why I think it's going to take another decade in the 2020s is because of legislation, because governments will hold it back, because until we have the laws in place that will allow self-driving cars to become mass market, it won't be happening. And in fact, I believe that in the next 10 years, we might get to a point where self-driving cars will become so standard that driving yourself might almost be illegal on certain streets. So, for example, once we go on the highway, you have to go on autopilot. That is no longer allowed to drive yourself because truly you're putting everybody else in danger. So that is a level that we might get to maybe in the 2030s. But one of the big trends for the 2020s is self-driving cars. Another big trend is disownership of cars. Because we already saw this happen slightly, we know, with Uber and Lyft, but the true shift is still to come because the generation that is growing up on Ubers and Lyfts, they are not even thinking about getting a car. A lot of them truly, myself included, once my car lease expires, I might not even get another car because it is so simple. It is less overhead, it is more flexible, I can get it when I need it, and I don't even have to spend time driving. So this ownership movement is also happening. Now the crazy thing is when you combine these first two trends, no more ownership and autonomous driving. And this is something that Uber is already working on, that instead of having a fleet of drivers, they just have a fleet of self-driving cars. So bookmark that in your brain because we're going to talk about that at the end of the video and how that can potentially be very dangerous. So now that we understand how things will be working on the ground, we got to see how does it work in the skies. So one of the biggest developments that's happening in flight is the return of supersonic flight. So the news say that by 2023, 2025, a company called Boom is expecting to release their first new supersonic airplanes. Now you might remember that we already had supersonic jets in the past. It was called the Concorde. However, the reason why we banned it is because of the supersonic boom. You know, when you go supersonic, you're going at such a speed that there's literally an explosion that's happening, so to say, and at least an audible explosion. And a lot of residents, because the airports were close to residential neighborhoods, they were complaining that every few hours this huge boom goes off. So they banned the supersonic airplanes, but now because technology of course advanced, they found ways to do it without the boom. So now we're bringing supersonic air travel back again. And what supersonic air travel essentially means is that I can fly from New York City to London in 3 hours and 15 minutes. For reference, I live close by Venice Beach, Los Angeles, and it takes me 3 hours and 20 minutes to walk to West Hollywood. So for me to walk inside my own city is the same it takes me to fly from New York to London. That is to put into perspective what we talked about earlier, how back in the day when we lived with tribes and you could only walk, this is your sphere of influence. Now your sphere of influence, within 3 hours, you can be in London. Within 5 hours, you can be in Tokyo. Literally, any place on Earth can be traveled to in less than 6 hours with the supersonic capabilities of 2025. And I'm sure that as time progresses, we'll get even faster and better so that you can perhaps come to any place on Earth in perhaps 3 hours or less, 2 hours or less. And the result that comes out of that, again, is that the world becomes smaller and smaller. And as it becomes smaller, it also becomes more familiar. It becomes more one unit. And we will get to that at the end again. Now, the final trend for the 2020s would be drones. Now, I know people have been saying drones would be happening for a decade or so, but the main holdup was not technology, but much rather policy. Right? So this is something we talked about in a previous Dawn of Man episode where we talked about how lawmakers are always lagging behind. However, I do believe that globally, lawmakers will finally get on top of their things and will be able to launch truly, drone deliveries and drone infrastructures in the near future. So because 2020s, that means we've got up to 12 years, and I think in 12 years we can definitely make it happen that drones will deliver things to us, that drones will be used for surveillance, that drones will be used for so many different things that they can have proper usages for. And finally, let's take a look at the 2030s and beyond. And I think there's really two main trends that are happening. One beneath the earth and one above the skies. Beneath the earth, this is one of the projects that Elon Musk has already been working on, and his company is called the Boring Company. It's essentially moving away from using cars in the first place to creating underground pod systems. You see, why have highways where we have millions of cars going in the same direction, millions of cars wasting energy going in the same direction? when we can have underground tunnel systems where perhaps, the ground itself moves in a certain direction, or we can have, multiple cars get onto a pod and they're shooting in one direction, and essentially moving everything underground. Because the thing is, above ground we already have so much infrastructure. We've got buildings, we've got farms, we've got factories, all that kind of stuff. Above ground is already pretty clustered, and adding infrastructure makes it worse for the environment. It takes up more space, and to a large extent, that is what is causing a lot of the traffic congestions. Now, when we move it underground, we've got all the space in the world, so to say, because we're not truly using underground yet. So when we move things underground, we'll be able to speed up traffic. So when we combine the Hyperloop concept with the Boring Company concept, we could have underground travel at such speeds where we could get from New York City to Los Angeles in 2 hours. Because why go zigzag across the country? We can just go one straight line to that other place, because there's nothing in the way. Again, underground is truly unexplored right now. We already use subway systems in the big cities, but what if we could use that for large transportation and make it truly so that you get out, for example, at your house, you go into the street, you go into the pod, and it takes you basically step into this glass capsule, right? So you step into this glass capsule, goes underground, it goes onto the main pod highway, and then basically locks on, and it shoots off at crazy speeds, and within minutes you can be at your destination. So that's essentially, if you look into the future of the Boring Company or beyond Boring Company, the pod systems, it's really interesting, and the main difference is that it will be a lot faster, it will be a lot more efficient, more energy friendly, and also basically save you a lot of time, make things faster than they already are. But most importantly, conceptually, it's the first move away when we talk about inland transportation from using cars, which has been very dominant for the past 100 years. And the final trend for this era is to go beyond our limits, right there into space. You see, in the 2020s, I explained how the world keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Everything become more and more familiar. So of course, just naturally, man will look for more. Man will look to explore. And it's already now a lot of companies that are working on space, such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, are predicting that we will be able and ready to travel to space with manned missions by 2030. In fact, I think Elon Musk wants to, have his first humans go to Mars by 2030, and I believe Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, he focuses more on the moon. So there's many different places we can go to, whether it's the moon, Mars, Titan. There's many different places that could be proper for man to explore, and that is truly becoming a reality already as of 2030 and the decade that ensues. So, what's the whole takeaway from this? First off, I think when the world becomes smaller, it truly sets us up for living in a decentralized world. You see, I think borders, the way we know them right now, are as much a physical feature as much as a psychological feature. You see, we see the boundaries of the United States and we see oh, this is the United States. China feels so far away. It's that foreign country. China, Russia, China, Russia, you always hear in the news, ooh, China, Russia's plotting something. Most people in the US haven't ever been to China, they've never been to Russia. But if it's a 2-hour flight away, these sentiments, they might change. So I truly believe that as transportation becomes better, we might be coming very close to truly living a decentralized world. Because if it takes you as long, traveling to maybe a neighboring city, as it takes you then to fly across the whole globe, all of a sudden, nothing feels foreign anymore. Nothing feels foreign anymore. The whole concept of foreign will become foreign to us. No pun intended. A full pun intended, to be honest. But the idea is really that we'll be able to live in a decentralized world, which kind of coincides with a lot of things that are happening in the cryptocurrency world, and beyond cryptocurrencies, decentralizing politics, decentralizing countries, breaking borders, removing borders, that we truly live in, that it becomes at some point Earth, rather than the United States and China, or United States and Europe, or North Korea and South Korea. I think what will happen is that travel and transportation become so fast and seamless in our world, is that we'll start associating us as the world, just like the village. Back then it was us, the tribe, and all the other tribes. Then it was us, the kingdom, against all the other kingdoms. Then it was us, the city-state, against all the other city-states. And it was us, the state, against all the other states. And then it was us, the nation, the country, against all the other countries. Then it became us, the multinational bodies. The United States is kind of one of them with the states. The European Union, the United Nations, well, the United Nations have everybody, but basically we moved towards the borders became bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think once transportation makes its final move, we can live in a world where truly we will say, Earth. That's our country. So who's them? Well, space travel, right? Once we're a multiplanetary species, it will set us up for being interplanetary. We have, maybe we have a colony on Mars, maybe we have a colony on the Moon, maybe we have a colony on Titan, maybe we have a colony on like some other stars, maybe even outside of our galaxies. The point is that our boundaries since the dawn of man, pun intended, has been expanding for centuries. And we're getting to the point now, we're going to the parabolic place where that expansion becomes parabolic, where we're already at the stage where it's like maybe there's 3 to 5 supranational bodies, but if you expand them any more, all of a sudden you have all of Earth. And then maybe even within our lifetimes, if we do become immortal, as we discussed in the last episode, maybe we'll live in a time where we're like, the Milky Way alliance, stuff like that. So this might seem really, really far out there, but what I do think will become a true reality is a decentralization of Earth, where we no longer think in terms of countries, but we think in terms of Earth. We are one globe, one people. That is, I think, something that is almost guaranteed to happen in the next 30 to 50 years. And it might seem fast, it might seem soon. But I think 50 years is when everything can properly play out that way. And we already see this happening when you converge those trends. With social media, for example, we've become a lot more aware of how the other half lives. We become a lot more aware of what's going on in other countries where the foreign doesn't seem as foreign anymore. So, but with every Dawn of Man episode, we always try to see where can things go wrong. So let's take a quick look at some of the things that we do truly need to be aware of. First of all, we need to make sure that with any kind of transportation improvements, we stay environmentally conscious, right? So just because everybody can't fly supersonic because it comes, cheap and affordable and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't mean necessarily it's a good thing. Carbon footprints are a real thing, and travel already makes a huge impact. So we got to make sure that whatever innovations we make, that we make them in a green way as well. So for example, some of these things have been already amazing. Doing more ride sharing, good for the environment, right? Electric cars, good for the environment. But some things are not. So we got to make sure that just because space tourism is a possibility, is probably one of the worst things you could do for the environment. But okay, I'm not going to bore you with the environment because some of you may care, some of you might not. But the fact is, pollution is real. Whether you believe in climate change or not, pollution is real. So take that to heart. Now, the truly dystopian scenario. So I hope you stick around for this one. This is the exciting one. The truly dystopian scenario is the following. When we look at the emergence of the disownership of cars and the automation of driving, the following will happen. So most people already said, they're no longer going to buy cars because they can just use Uber. They can just call a Lyft. They can do whatever. Now the problem becomes when it's self-driving, it's not even the drivers own the cars anymore. Much rather, all the cars in the world will be owned by companies such as Uber, Lyft, whoever the big players are. So it is a fair possibility that about 95% of the world's transportation power is in the hands of maybe 3 to 5 companies. So even if we don't want to go, absolutely, dystopian where we say, Uber becomes Skynet or any of that stuff, because I know that is always far-fetched. Let's find something in the middle ground, right? So if somebody, for example, were to hack these companies, they could take over all transportation. Or if a natural disaster happens, you can't just hop in your car and drive for safety. Or perhaps if your government is doing something incorrect, again, you can't just hop in your car and disappear, because then everything is surveilled, everything is controlled by these central authorities. Or perhaps maybe some emergency happens and you just need to disappear, you need to go somewhere, maybe you need to rush to the hospital, whatever it is. But if they're having system errors, maybe you can't log into your app, or perhaps they temporarily banned you because the weekend before you got drunk and you threw up in the car, whatever happens, and then you can't call an Uber, but there's an emergency and you truly need to go somewhere, you're stuck. So and these are some silly examples, but I like to keep them silly, because if I go too dystopian to you and too crazy, I don't think I'll get through. So the main idea is that centralization, once again, is one of the biggest issues that may emerge in the 2020s when we look at how there won't be as much individual transportation anymore. So what I would definitely recommend is, I think as much as I said earlier, I would probably never buy a car again. I think there's some power to maintaining the flexibility. There's some power, even if it's an old car, just owning a car in the future, even when we live in an age where everything's automated. Because when you need to go somewhere, you better have the flexibility. You don't it's the same thing we talked about before when we talked about hacking and Google. You don't want to give too much power to certain individual players. And I think a good example to that is actually when you watch, and this just came to me this moment, if you watch the movie I, Robot, actually, I believe there was an EMP, and I think all the cars all of a sudden shut down because I think the AI took them over and they couldn't go anywhere. But Will Smith, he actually still had, a gas-powered motorcycle. So he was able to go through traffic. He was able to get to where he needed to be using the motorcycle. So just fun fact using pop culture. Definitely watch the movie. Super exciting movie. So to bring it full circle, I think the main trend that's happening right now when it comes to transportation is that we are moving towards a world that is more connected, that's getting smaller, that is becoming more familiar, and we're truly uniting as one Earth rather than countries. And secondly, I think it's important for us to realize that with that move, we have to make sure that we stay sustainable, and at the same time, we stay very cautious, very, very cautious to not give up too much of our powers, so that we can remain flexible, that we can remain mobile, and that a few companies can't essentially, by their failure, bring us back into the Middle Ages where we'll live those tribal lives. Because right now we still have amazing freedoms, we have a lot of individuality, but the more we buy into the sharing economy, the less we own. And as much as not owning and being minimalist and all that is great, I truly believe in it, we have to make sure that we still have access, and that we don't give all the access to a few key holders, because essentially what we're doing here is creating more and more gatekeepers. And we're building gatekeepers for some basic fundamental, rights, some basic fundamental powers that we need in our day-to-day lives. So we gotta make sure that we decentralize, we gotta make sure that we're sustainable. Anyways, guys, this was a very unique episode. You see, as we go deeper in Dawn of Man, this is something I enjoy about Dawn of Man, is that now that we covered some of the bigger topics, we're getting into some of the more niche topics, but they have just as big as an impact, just as big of implications, really, on our lives, on our future. And a lot of that will be explored in the future as well. We can do a whole episode on space travel, for example, which I'm really excited about. But either way, guys, leave me a comment in the, below. Where do you think is transportation going to go? Would you ever consider traveling to Mars? Would you ever consider going intergalactic? Or beyond that, would you, for example, ever give up your rights of mobility? Meaning, would you always keep your own car, your own modes of transportation? Or would you buy into the system where you say, you know what, I don't need anymore, let me just Uber everywhere? And could that perhaps be a bad thing or a good thing down the road? So I would love to hear your thoughts. Comment below, and I'll see you next week. Take care.